Hi, property people. Thanks for joining us today. As always, we will be sharing ideas, experiences, problems, and solutions for property people like you. Our interviews will get you to know some of the most active professionals in the industry that have achieved some pretty impressive stuff. Hearing about their successes, failures, strategies, and insights, we really hope you enjoy. Hi, property people. Welcome. Today, I am joined with Jeroen Hoppe. Jeroen Hoppe is a seasoned property investor and property manager, focusing on portfolio building and managing properties across South London. Jeroen brings investors and property people together through WhatsApp groups and monthly socials in Clapham. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jeroen. How are you?
Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate you having me on the show.
Good. Well, I thought it'd be a good idea for me to connect with you and get you on Property People because you are good at getting people around a table, around a social event, and kind of encouraging discussion amongst very seasoned property professionals, and generally creating a really good vibe, which has to be appreciated because property when I started out in 2001 was kind of a lonesome game. You'd work with the people that are in your office or in your local area, and there, since the kind of digital age has really come upon us, people like yourself have been able to reach out much further and wider and bring people together. And your level of experience and knowledge of property management and investing is extensive. I'm not sure there's much that you don't know about property investing that's not worth knowing. So if we could start though with where you were at school in terms of what you wanted to be when you grew up. Was it always in property? Was it always to be in property management?
Wow. Yeah. Firstly, thanks for the great compliments. I take great pride in bringing people together and things. And as you said, it has been a sort of lonely game, and bringing people together is really my forte. I love bringing people together in property, and that's really what I want to do. Some people really want to be a big developer and do big units, and boast about their big developments, and that's never been me. I've always remained of the opinion that you can get big by staying small. And having said that, I think with the WhatsApp group that I have and the kind of social thing that I run with the Down to South London group, I think that ethos really shines through because it is a small group. It's very niche. I don't appeal to everyone. There's bigger and better meetings out there, like the Central London ones that attract 200, 300 people, but that's never my thing. I think smaller is better, not bigger is better. So to come back to your question, have I always wanted to do this? Well, property has always been an interesting part of my life because moving from school to school, I moved from country to country when I was smaller, and you see, how the different people live. Like I've lived in Africa, I've lived in the Middle East, I've lived in America, and people live differently. So property has always been a thing. Did I always want to be in property when I was growing up? No, not really. But looking back at it, it's given me quite a lot of skill moving around, talking to different people from different backgrounds, be it social or ethnic or physical, different parts of the world. I think everyone does business in different ways, and it's very important to be sort of culturally adaptable, I suppose. But no, property was very much, I rolled into it out of university. I couldn't get a job. I've got a marketing degree, business and marketing. Great, sounds all good. Couldn't get a job for love nor money in marketing. So someone said to me, you should try a estate agency. I fell in love with it. I was really good at sales, just stringing deals together, bringing people together. I guess it comes to that cultural thing. And later I took to lettings, rentals. So just quick, easy money, deal comes in the door, deal goes out the door. Literally 20 units a month for, I did that for a good 15, 16 years before I sold my own agency and I moved on to something else.
So in terms of your cultural background, if you don't mind me touching upon that, you mentioned different parts of the world. So how did that come about? Because I do find London is a great melting pot for so many cultures, and you ended up settling here and building a business here. Why was it that you were moving around so much to begin with?
So my dad's work, really. My dad was a diplomat for the Dutch government, and we moved from country to country every 3 to 4 years. So I was actually born in South Africa, moved to Lebanon, then to New York, Nigeria, Israel, and then ended up in Holland for a few years. So always American or British schools, and really it's the coming together of, it'd be like, oh, my dad works for the Ethiopian embassy. Oh, my dad works for the American embassy. And you see stuff on the news like a couple of years ago, the whole thing in Libya kicked off. I actually know the American ambassador in Libya because I went to school with his son, so I've been in his house. It's just freaky how, little stuff in the world, yes, it all mixes together.
That's really interesting, I must admit. I think not many. So one of the reasons I like doing this podcast is people get to really know a little bit more about the background beyond the property profession. But ultimately, you ended up landing in London. Which why London? Why not New York? Why not Holland? What brought you? What made you feel that London was the place that you wanted to settle and build a business?
It's a good question. I mean, I came to study in London because my last school in Holland was a British school. Had it been an American school, I think I would have probably ended up in America because a lot of my classmates and friends, they ended up studying in London
Right.
or Bristol or, UK in general. And I'm still friends with a good group of people now. There's probably 5 of us that live within a 5-mile radius here. So and I've known them for nearly 30 years.
All in South London.
All in South London, yeah.
That's where it's at. So in terms of your appetite for business, though, if you studied a business and marketing degree, you obviously had that whole mindset from day one. You wanted to be in the business world, if not set up your own business. Has that been something from an early age that you've always had in mind?
Oh, business is absolutely fascinating. When I was at uni, it was always working for a big corporate that I aspired to, and then quickly going through the ranks in a small independent estate agency. You reached a level where you kind of, you topped out. You were either going to be top management, and you were going to get promoted to director, and I sort of stuck there. I wasn't being promoted to director at the time, so I set up for myself. That was just the natural progression of things. So yeah, it's interesting. You want to run a business of your own. You want to make money, whatever. And funnily enough, as a young entrepreneur, you always think like, oh, I can do this better. I can make more money with less hours. Well, a lot of entrepreneurs know that that's not true. You put in a hell of a lot of hours. It's just a lot more rewarding. So you get more reward than just the money.
I think that's really well said, actually, because a lot of people, including myself, always think, well, I've learned the business now, I can go off and do it myself, but it's not actually that easy. And it can be lonely at the top. But like you said very well, actually, I think in the end of the day, if you've got that entrepreneurial DNA, it's just a lot more rewarding, regardless of how hard the work is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the setting up is the most difficult, and secondly, scaling. I know a lot of people that are stuck at this sort of level, and they obviously want to go big, but there's kind of like this no man's land in the middle where scaling is very difficult because you think, okay, well, I can outsource things, but they become more expensive. There's not enough margin because you haven't got enough volume in order to, make up that extra cost.
So in terms,
it's always very difficult.
So in terms of getting a job as an estate agent, because actually, funnily enough, that's where I started. Where did you work for a corporate? Did you work for an independent?
It was a small independent. Well, I say small. They had, I think, 8 branches at the time, and over the years they got to 11. I worked for a company called Ludlow Thompson. I started off in the Acton office, and then worked in Oval, Dulwich, Lewisham. I ended up running the Lewisham office for a good 5 years.
Wow.
This was like 2005 to 2010. Did really well. I thought, well, what's better in life? I'm an estate agent. I'm earning well into 6 figures just to show people houses, basically. Well, not show people houses, because then you have staff and they show people houses for you. And you go, right, have you got a deposit? No, go after the deposit, right? Always be closing. And what could go wrong, right? It was a good brand. Got pulled into plenty of valuations, got loads of stock, the demand was good, their marketing's pretty good, and their systems are absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So what could go wrong? Well, 2008, Lehman Brothers, all that sort of thing. So it started to go downhill pretty quickly, especially in Lewisham, where the market was pretty badly hit. I was letting a lot of flats in Greenwich. Hey, guess what? Half of Greenwich, they work in Canary Wharf, but Canary Wharf was a ghost town then. So, it became a very, very difficult place. Anyway, I stuck it out for 2 years, moved around offices a bit, and that's when I took the plunge and started working for myself.
Wow. So you went straight from Ludlow Thompson to deciding, you know what, rather than moving agency, I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to set up my own brand and I'm going to do this all on my own.
Absolutely. Well, it wasn't all by myself. I had a business partner who ran the sales departments in Lewisham at the time. And I ran the lettings department. And I thought, right, well, that's a good mix. We've seen that before. Steve and David were very good at hiring, sort of attracting people that were entrepreneurs. So it wasn't something that hadn't been done before. There were plenty of other people that have worked for Ludlow Thompson in London, like, Steve and Davis, Brian Gibbs, Davison Gibbs, Atkinson McLeod. There's what are they called now? Nest Seekers.
And these are guys that have worked together in a branch before and decided to set up on their own.
At Ludlow Thompson, yeah. So it was literally like, well, if they can do it, come on, man. We've got the brains, we can do this. So we did. We went out, and the Zonda Matthew brand was created. So we had an office. First, we did a serviced office sort of gig, obviously to keep costs low, and just cold call, Gumtree, Loop, whatever it was, and yeah, it worked. It worked. We pulled in £100,000 worth of fees in the first year.
Wow,
which is pretty good, from standing start. We didn't steal the database or anything like that. We just honest hard work. It's like, right, well, the competition is charging you 10%, we'll charge you 5% because we've got no overheads. Let's crack on. I've got 10 years of experience at the time. Would you give me your keys? Yeah, sure. Here you go, bud. So, and we just did business, just in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out.
And that is amazing. So, taking a business from standing start, getting cold calling, but being able to tell the clients that, look, you're going to get pretty much the same level of service because we're the same people that were sitting over there charging you 10%. Now we're just charging you 5%. And with that gave you your foot in the door, and you're able to build a business from that foundation, which is pretty incredible. So in terms of lettings, because you mentioned that you've lent towards the letting side of things. Was there any reason? What's the reason why you weren't kind of? Because I do find that with a lot of estate agents, they actually prefer sales or lettings in most instances. But what made you feel that lettings was more your thing?
I think it's the quick turnaround. I get bored very easily, and other entrepreneurs will find this as well. You get an idea, you go with it, and then you set it up, and you go, let's move on to the next thing. And with lettings, it's very much the same thing. You've got an ongoing relationship with the landlord, yes, because over the years you let his property a few times. But generally, it's, a customer walks in through the door, or it's an internet inquiry. You can show them around a flat on a Monday, and you can move them in on a Friday. It's as simple as that. In, out, in, out, in, out. And, it works well for me because, I'm not the nicest of guys. People don't want to deal with me for 3 months during
That's not fair.
But literally, hello on a Monday and goodbye on a Friday. That's just about the right amount of time, isn't it? So there's no time for them to find out that I'm a stalker or whatever. It's just in, out, in, out. It's quick, easy money. I like the quick turnaround. And if I were to have, if you were to ask me, would you rather do high volume, low value? I would rather do that than low volume, high value, because with sales, I found as well, you get the odd big fee in there. The average fee for selling a flat in London is probably 4, 5, 6 grand, whatever it is. You get the odd 10K or 12K. Oh, I had a 20K. I remember this once. I had a 60 grand chain, all in-house in Acton lined up, and one of them fell through in the middle because.
Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. So the chain falls apart, and literally, you're in the pub very early that day. No,
and you're not celebrating that. You the thing is with sales is you're constantly living on edge because you think that anything could fall through, and then one in three sales on average falls through. So you just kind of like, like which one's it going to be, and I hope it's not going to be the big ticket one, and it could be for so many different reasons. So lettings gives you that reassurance that people need to move, people need to live somewhere. If they say that they're going to do it, they're in, and it's less than 30 days. Everything's pretty much tied up.
Absolutely. They're committed. They paid a holding deposit. None of this. Yeah, okay, it is still subject to contract and all that. They can still pull out. Yeah, but back in the day before the tenant fee ban, before the days where you can only take a week's rent, we used to take £500 on the day and then another £500 3 days later to show commitment. And yes, I have kept £1,000 off tenants because they lost their job, changed their mind, or seen one with a purple front door instead of a red front door, and Sally preferred that, and Harry's really angry that he's losing his £1,000. But hey, guess what? Contracts are contracts, even a deposit, agreement. So they still fall out of bed, is what I'm saying, but far less than sales. I mean, out of 20 deals a month that go through, maybe one or two will fall out of bed because I don't know, the landlord changes his mind or the tenant, whatever, but it just does not happen as much as sales. And I'd rather a £2,000 deal fall out of bed than 20 grand.
You mentioned the tenant fee ban. How has that affected you? How have you pivoted? Because I assume that you were taking fees like everybody else because it was a really good revenue for letting agents. Did it affect you badly, or is it a good thing that it's happened? What's your take on the whole thing?
Well, firstly, it didn't affect me that much because although I run a property management company now and so on, like I sold my estate agency business, so I'm not really that dependent on it. I know a lot of estate agents are, and when I was an estate agent and I had the whole business, it was probably about 25% of our turnover. So it's a large chunk, believe you me. It is a large chunk of income for agents to lose. Now, agents aren't stupid. They prepare and they're just going to push on to landlords. Landlords are just going to push it back onto tenants. Has it affected me that much? No, not really. I mean, most of my stuff is rent to rent now. You can still charge £50 for, a tenant changeover, silly stuff like that, And yeah, we'd like to charge a little bit more because it reduces people moving around because it's a cost, it's an effort. I'd rather charge £150 than £50. But there is a slight way around it in the sense that, if the agent does the paperwork, the landlord is responsible for the agent's charges, and the landlord is allowed to recoup his reasonable costs from the tenant who's, changing over halfway through tenancy. So generally the agent still charges for a tenant changeover. They just don't charge the tenant, they charge the landlord, who then recharge it to the tenant. So it's just a different way of doing it, really. It's a tax.
It's a tax on the landlord. I guess that's what the government was trying to do, was trying to take the burden off the lower income earners, which is the tenants usually, rather than the big fat greedy greasy landlords.
Yeah, that's true. But they're just, it's like I wrote an article on this on my blog because I have a blog as well, the Clapham Property blog, because my estate agency was in Clapham. I wrote an article about how this is like the 29.9% APR store card you can get from Argos. You buy £100 item, and at the end of the year, if you're not paying it, it's 130 quid. Well, the same is true with this tenant fee ban. All right, they're not paying it up front, but they will be paying it. They'll be paying it monthly in higher rents and all that sort of business. And all these other stealthy things that people will concoct in order to get the money back, because there's an equilibrium, and the government is artificially distorting that equilibrium, saying like, oh, hang on, we're going to take more money from Mr. Landlord. Well, if Mr. Landlord has net less profit, he's going to increase his gross price, isn't he? So he's going to be left with the same or more.
That's so true. And effectively, the government tried to manipulate it to make it look better. But at the end of the day, the market will speak. And if landlords can get away with putting their rents up slightly to cushion that extra cost that they're going to get from their letting agent, because the letting agent's not going to go south unless and they need to make sure that they get those fees in one way or another. It all kind of balances itself out and finds equilibrium along the way. But Absolutely. Is it true that some letting agents would have suffered because they haven't been able to pivot well enough? They haven't been able to communicate to their landlords well enough or fast enough, so they've had to maybe stick with the same fees, and they've got a lot I mean, and then they sell up to other larger agencies? Is that something that probably has happened?
I think to an extent, yes, because there will always be people that literally bury their heads in the sand and don't prepare for these things. But I know the agency that I'd sold my portfolio to, they were already preparing from the moment that the news was like, oh, we might ban things. And they were already writing it in their terms of business, going like, oh, look, if this tenant fee ban actually does happen, Mr. Landlord, we want you to sign now that you're happy to pay for it now, even though, you know, might be 2 years down the line or 18 months or however long it was that they announced it. So they prepared, they really prepared. And, you know, when it comes down to it, hey, Mr. Landlord, look, we used to charge these tenants 400 quid. There's 4 tenants and 4 guarantors, you know, someone's got to pay that 400 quid. We can't charge them anymore.
That's so true. And I think that says a lot about businesses, actually, that you have to just be able to prepare for changing landscape and regulations so that you can adapt quickly. I mean, I have a few properties that I rent through agents, and yeah, the level of fees that they charge me for, you know, for check-ins and check-outs and stuff. So I've seen my fees go up effectively, and then all I'm trying to do is put up the rents for the tenants, if I can get away with it, obviously. But I will do everything that I can to recoup that in some way, shape, or form through the rental income. So the tenants end up paying for it in one way or another.
Definitely, and the same is true for the Section 24 tax, which you haven't touched on. But I'll touch on that now, actually, because I think that's the same thing, really. Again, the government has made this ploy to generation rent, saying, "Oh, look, we're tackling these evil landlords, and we're giving you, you know, cheaper rent by taxing the evil landlords, so they don't make as much money." But in actual fact, it's a big shot in the foot, because you're going to get landlords selling up, and you know, so there's less rental supply. You know, all that stock goes onto the sales market or whatever. There's less rental supply, and what happens when there's less supply? It's simple Keynesian economics. With a decreased supply, you're going to get an increase in price, because the demand is still the same. So there's still the same number of tenants looking, and now suddenly you've got, you know, 90 flats instead of 100 to choose from. Hey, guess what? Price will go up 10%. Simply.
Yeah. So they're trying to control. I guess they're trying to control the price of the actual values of the properties by increasing the supply into the market, because landlords will sell up. So more first time buyers can get onto the market. But again, there's with economics, with every action, there's a reaction, and it's cause and effect. So whether it's going to be worthwhile having done that in the long run, who knows? Even things like the extra surcharge on the stamp duty, that is, in a way, to kind of cool down the market, so there's less people that have already got one property to buy another one and another one. But again, if there's less landlords coming into the market, less supply, prices get pushed up. I guess all of these things have a time lag, so the actual how it all plays out and who it really affects, only time will tell.
Yeah, it's a time game, isn't it? Like, it's not like, you know, you turn on the tap and water comes out. It's not instant like that. These things do take time. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I think obviously the Corona COVID stuff going on at the moment is creating a bigger lag, because I think we've seen that throughout the whole lockdown, practically no one's moved. Viewings are on the up again, but I still think, you know, people are really putting off aspirational moves and all that sort of thing. People are only moving if they absolutely have to. So again, it's slowing things down.
So with your rent to rent, you've got rent to rent. So if for those that don't know, explain what rent to rent is.
Well, it's an old-fashioned terminology, really, rent to rent. It's a bit outdated, because it used to be, hello, Mr. Landlord, I'm going to rent your property, right? So I'm renting it, and then I'm going to sublet it, so rent out again to multiple tenants. So say Mr. Landlord has a 3-bedroom house with 2 reception rooms. Guess what? That's now 3 bedrooms upstairs as normal, and the 2 reception rooms downstairs. Now you've got 5 bedrooms, right? So you sublet that to 5 individuals and offer that as a sort of bills inclusive jobby. So I don't know, hypothetical numbers here. Say you rent it off Mr. Landlord for £1,500, and you rent out 5 rooms for £500 each. That's 2,500. Okay, take off a few quid for bills and things, but you're left with a margin. you guarantee the rent to Mr. Landlord, and then you make the difference, sort of thing. That's a different setup to your traditional estate agent, where your traditional estate agent would maybe make the landlord $1,800 a month for this 3-bedroom house and rent it out to, it could be 3 sharers, it could be a family, it could be whoever, right? But then Mr. Landlord needs to pay the agents 10% commission. So take 180 off that, take away the VAT, take away your, your setup costs, your inventory cost, your tenancy agreement, your deposit registration if you're not using custodial. Name some other EPC, gas, electrical certification soon. Whatever safety tax the government can think of. And soon you're left with that 1,500 quid anyway. So Mr. Landlord thinks like, all right, I'll give it to Mr. Jeroen, because he's going to give me a guaranteed rent of 1,500, and it's a 5-year contract, and I can just forget about it. He takes care of all that nonsense. So there you go. That's the crux of rent to rent. That's an old-fashioned terminology. Now it's done through a management agreement. So, hello, Mr. Landlord. I'm your agent. I'm going to sublet all the rooms, but we keep all the rent, and you get your fixed monthly amount.
And so that's how it's done. And so instead of signing them up to like an AST with a tenant, you sign them up to, is it a licensing agreement?
No, again, that's a really common misconception that with rent to rent, you can issue licenses. So licenses can only be issued when the landlord is resident in the property. So anyone, and I've looked at plenty of rent to rent portfolios to buy, they were taught by the gurus of the YouTube and whatever else, wherever else we find these gurus these days, that you can simply issue licenses and you can boot them out at 2 weeks notice and all that silly stuff. But nothing is further from the truth. If a person lives in the property, it's their primary residence. The rent is under 100 grand a year, or 125 a month, or whatever the limit is now, which it will be at 500 quid a month for a room. That's an AST. It's basically an AST. No matter if you dress it up as a license or whatever, in a court of law, if you have to take them to court, the judge is going to say, well, it's an AST. Did you register the deposit? Did you serve your prescribed information? Did you do all that? Because if you didn't, then you can't get a possession order. So.
You've got the whole right to rent thing. And I mean, there's so many different regulations now. It's unbelievable compared to 20 years ago when I started. I mean, in terms of how important it is for a landlord that's starting out today that thinks, you know what, I'll self-manage it. I'll save the, 100, 200, 300 pounds a month and just manage my own property. What would you say to those kinds of landlords? And how is it important? Is it to know all of the regulations that are set up for lettings?
Well, there's 2 schools of thought, really. See no evil, hear no evil. And the other school of thought is get educated. And I think a lot of people that jump into rent to rent or landlording in general, they think it's easy money, right? Oh, you rent out a room, how difficult is it? You whack on a spare room and someone will come and pay you money and you just get a template off the internet and great. But as we just said, there's like 170 odd pieces of legislation that you have to be aware of. You don't have to know inside out. And thankfully, over the years, I've been able to sort of keep abreast with this. But even I miss stuff, I'm only human. Anyone starting out now, you're best off going to like the NLA or the RLA, do some property management courses, because that's my number one bugbear. People that think, okay, rent to rent is great. It's an easy entry point because you don't need a lot of money. Well, getting the deal is difficult, but once you got a deal off the ground, okay, it's low money in strategy for property, great. But people don't have any sort of property management experience. You need some technical knowledge. Like over the years, I've got like my ARLA 2 and my NFOP Technical Award 3, and there's higher, and I'm sure there's people that are far better and more clever at things than me. But yeah, the point is I miss stuff. Stuff gets missed all the time. But when stuff goes wrong, you want to rely on the fact that you've done it the right way. And 9 times out of 10, renting and property management is very much people management skills. And when stuff doesn't go wrong, it's fine. Oh, you didn't serve the right notice because you didn't cross the T or dot the I. Well, that's all right. We're not in a court of law. It's not going to get thrown out. You're not in front of a judge now. But if you got put in front of a judge, that T better be crossed and that I better be dotted, and you better have served all that documentation that we just discussed. and you best have checked their right to rent and God knows what else, because otherwise you can't get a possession order, or you can't get a judgment for your rent arrears, stuff like that.
I saw this crazy thing that like 1 in 3 deposits aren't registered at the moment, and that law came in quite a while ago. I mean, what are the implications of some? Do you know if a landlord has? I've heard that they can get fined up to like 3 times the amount of the deposit or something. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. But that is by far not the scariest thing I've heard. So the scariest one, this is the one that scares me most actually. If you grant a tenancy without an HMO license in place where it needs to be, the tenants can actually apply for a rent repayment order via the courts. So any rent that they have paid, they can claim back.
Jesus Christ.
How scary is that? So they can go, hello, Mr. Judge. Well, you know what? Sam didn't have a license that says you're allowed to let the property. You know, you could have done everything else. You could have had your electrical cert, your gas cert, your this, your that, everything else, but you didn't apply to the council for this license, and you've grown a tenancy agreement. Tenant can claim back all of his rent money, so he can stay there for free. I mean, talk about harsh. I mean, yeah, okay, all right, £200, slap on the wrist. Oh, naughty, naughty. We'll get a license. Sorry, Mr. Judge. No, pay back all the rent. That's just outrageous.
So I guess the argument is that the landlords are responsible to supply the housing market and the tenants with a standard of housing, and unless it's been signed off by somebody, they're going to say, well, how do we know that your property is up to the right standard? So I guess by having such a harsh penalty, they're really trying to encourage landlords to kind of come forward with their properties. But it's amazing how many people still haven't done so regardless.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and I think that drives it's obviously a ploy from the government to get landlords registered, get them paying tax and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
but
taxes as well.
Yeah, I just think rather than beat them with a cane and try and root them out, why don't you dangle the carrot? You know, why don't you give landlords a tax break if they come and register their property and get an HMO license? You know, like, who would not want a tax break or a grant or something like that? You know, dangle the carrot and get these landlords above ground again, because there's plenty of people that are still renting out, you know, a room with 15 bunk beds in it and all that silly nonsense that you see on Channel 4's Rogue Landlords.
Yeah.
There's loads of those. They don't just like disappear overnight, you know, because where do they go? They can't sell up, because guess what? If they go to Mr. Estate Agent and say, oh, I've got this illegal HMO that has, you know, dangling wires above the fish tank, and you do one wrong step and you're going to fall through the floor into the basement. But could you sell it for me? Like, it's just not going to happen, is it? These guys are going to keep renting it to people that have just, you know, hitched on the Eurotunnel and come across, and you know, the poorest of the poor and the really most vulnerable, they're going to keep renting these rooms. It's supply and demand. You know, you offer something for £50 a week in London, and they're like, you know, is it?
You'll have a queue.
You know, goes out the front door. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is odd, actually.
Sorry,
but go on. I'll move on to that point later.
Well, go tell us what's odd. Go on.
I was just going to come back to the point about supply and demand. You said if you offer something for £50 a week, people will come queuing. And just on the back of this whole Corona nonsense, I've had to give a few reductions in room rates, because we've had a couple of, I would say, lower skilled employed people move back to their home country. So I've had one from Spain, one from France, you know, that sort of jazz. And they sort of went back home to their parents just before lockdown. And obviously during the lockdown, we couldn't really, well, we advertised, but there was a ghost town online. No one was looking. Yeah. And now that the lockdown's lifted, you know, you would expect demand to pick back up a bit, and it is. But I've got a room in Surbiton, for example, that was let at £500. I had to give it away at £400 simply because there was just no demand whatsoever. So I've taken a bit of a hit on that. And that's sort of the lower end of the market. These are like box rooms, right? These are like probably you would think the least desirable anyway. But funnily enough, what you said earlier, £50 a week and people start queuing, the box rooms are always the quickest to go, and now they're not. So it's really throwing me in
Ah.
terms of where's the demand, because I've long let stuff, and other colleagues of mine, they are letting, like, regular stuff, your vanilla, Harry and Sally get a 2-bed garden flat, and that's just the sort of flat. But like rooms, a bit tricky at the moment.
And actually, there's two things that I wanted to touch upon. But firstly, in terms of the margin from a letting management point of view, because I guess, isn't it the case where you've increased your margin as to if you were renting that same property out for the landlord, you're, by doing what you're doing, adding that value and getting more tenants in there, you're adding a little bit more margin on the rent to rent, which makes it more worthwhile. But isn't it also the fact that there's a lot more management involved, and therefore it's not really a good idea for a landlord who's got 1 or 2 buy-to-lets for them to manage themselves? Is that fair to say?
I would definitely say that HMO management, i.e. multi-let, so renting out room by room,
Yeah.
multiple tenancy rooms in one property, it's harder work because you have more people to manage. They tend to move in at different times of the year, although I try to get them all to move in and out at the same time. And there tend to be slightly more issues because they're strangers and they don't get on, and I want to leave early because she's a minger and she shaves in the bath and doesn't clean up after herself, and he's left his dishes in the sink again, and today I had, can someone come and change my light bulb because I can't figure out how to take, and that's the second time that's happened as well. 2 different properties, people can't figure out how to change a light bulb. I don't know, like when people graduate from renting rooms to renting a whole property, it's like some kind of education jump as well. They're suddenly able to change their own light bulbs. Well, which isn't necessarily true actually, because when I move new people into like a vanilla let, oftentimes I find that half the light bulbs aren't working. So either they must have eaten carrots non-stop, or they just lived in the dark all day. I don't know. Like, I don't get it. Just change, like, how difficult? YouTube it. There's so much information on YouTube.
Everything's on YouTube these days. Surely that's all you need to do is send them the link. If they say that the light bulb's not working, here's the link for you. Enjoy the light that you'll be able to get from this.
I've done it in the past, yeah.
So in terms of debt collecting, because you have been quite honest and open, and property isn't plain sailing, and there are pitfalls, and especially if you're in property management, the largest issue, or at least what I'm most paranoid about, is the is voids. The voids are what will cripple you. And in terms of debt collecting, touch wood, I've always been quite fortunate in that I haven't had to call upon guarantors or have anybody in arrears. I've been very fortunate. But through working for an agency, it's a numbers game. If you've got a huge portfolio of management properties, of anything north of, let's say, 50 to 100, you're going to have it from time to time for sure. The rules quite well. One of the things that I know is that whatever you do, you should not walk into the property with your key and move the tenant stuff out, because apparently that's breaking the law.
It is, right? Yeah. That's a criminal offence. Yeah. It falls under, they've got protection from eviction under the Protection from Eviction Act 77. And I refer to those pieces, this rolls straight off the tongue. This is not rehearsed or anything, but I refer to this so often because the first thing that landlords think of, like, he's not paying rent, I'm going to move the stuff out and stick it in the front yard and have a yard sale. And I'm like, yeah, but that's actually a criminal offence. So it's no longer a civil matter. Like, you can actually go to jail for that sort of thing. Just like you can go to jail for not having a gas safety. That's a criminal offence, not a civil one. So no, with rent arrears, it's very much and I've been lucky as well. I've not had any rent arrears in my personal portfolio, bar one, just the first one in lockdown. But that's 1 out of 5 tenants. So in that particular unit. So that's been manageable. But yeah, if you've got someone who doesn't pay, yeah, it's tricky. Communication is the best. And yeah, I hear from other landlords as well that, sometimes they just don't want to communicate. They want to be unreasonable. They go, there's a repair that needs doing. That's fine, I'll get it done for you. Great, repair's done, pay up. no, no, we got this, and then there's the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. They just find some excuse, and obviously, it's the tenant is not acting lawfully and not acting within the confines of their contract. If they choose not to pay, they still have to pay the rent, even though there's repairs to do. The landlord's granted a reasonable amount of time, and if he doesn't do his repairs, that's a breach of the contract, yes. But if you don't pay your rent on time, that's a breach. So there's a breach on both sides. Two rights don't make it wrong. The crux of it is tenants must always pay their rents and landlords must always do their repairs. Now, we know from experience that that doesn't always happen. But I've been lucky. I think the whole furloughing thing and the corona stuff going on at the moment, the government's been quite good with I don't want to call it handouts. I think handouts is the wrong word, but some money.
Support.
Yeah,
Financial support.
Support's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it's not handouts, it's support, is it? But they've been quite good, and I think.
This is the YouTube technical. There you go. We're back.
Yeah, sorry, I had another call coming in. I think the government's been really good. So my tenants have called upon those bits of support that have been available, and touch wood, no real problems. A little bit in the rent-to-rent portfolio because, as I say, people have done a bunk just before lockdown, and so my contract's till September, but I'm off to France. Bye.
So what do you do in those instances? Yeah, what do you do in those instances?
Well, it's a tricky one. I'm going through a few of those at the moment, and the crux of it is that I will have to offer them an early surrender, but I'm only offering them an early surrender because once you surrender a tenancy agreement, you can't come after them for the future arrears, right? So if they went last month and their tenancy agreement's until September, I can cut it now, but then the void from now until I get it relet is my problem. So what I'm doing in the background is I'm trying to find a tenant for their room, trying to get their room relet, and at the point of reletting, then I say, well, Billy Bob, I understand you've gone back to France or wherever it is. Let's do a surrender. You can surrender from the 15th, and then I've got a new tenant moving in on the 16th, and then I'll have to chase them for the money from whenever they left to the 15th of where we're now June. So it might be a couple of months' time, that I see the money. It might be never, but I will get a county court judgment against their name. So when they come back to this country and they have to give their previous addresses for any kind of bank statements or opening a bank account, any kind of credit agreement, any kind of check, they will have a CCJ on record, so they'll need to pay me at that point. So.
I've heard that that's actually quite a good way of threatening a tenant with action, rather than saying, we need you to pay. Saying, actually, you know what, you're going to get a CCJ, so your credit score and everything's going to be screwed for the rest of your life if you just don't. At least have an engaged conversation. If you're struggling to pay, it's not that we want you to pay the whole amount straight away or anything, but we want you to at least communicate so that we can come to some sort of agreement whereby we're not left high and dry and feeling like we've been treated unfairly as a landlord.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always reasonable with tenants. I offer them help, and the lines of communication are always open. But if they just go, no, I won't pay, then I get a little bit upset.
Of course. Well, this is the other question that I wanted to ask you about. Is buy-to-let dead?
Buy-to-let is, I was of the opinion it is not dead. And I'm still of that opinion, providing that you can buy cheap enough and add value. Because I think the days are long gone that you can just buy a new build flat off the shelf and stick some tenants in there. And see you later, it's going to make money. Those days have long gone. You've really got to buy cheap, spend some money on it, and then put a bit of hustle in it to add value, whether you're doing an extension or changing a 2-bed to a 3-bed, or splitting a house into flats or whatever. You need to increase your yield, you need to increase your margins somehow or another. It is very rare to be able to buy a property and rent it out straight away without any work and make decent money. And with decent money, I say, any money after having, paid your letting agent, paid your accountant, paid for electrical testing, gas safety, inventories, all that palaver. All necessary, mind you, but, once you pay all that, there's not a lot left.
I agree 100%. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. That recently, and I say recently, over the last few years, I've been only buying properties which I can add some value to increase that yield. Otherwise, it doesn't. It just seems. I mean, especially when you're looking in London, where the margins have been really squeezed, the level of demand here for property has just hammered the yield completely. But you focus mainly on South London. So another question I wanted to ask you was about would you have you invested outside of South London, or are you 100% focused on South London? Would you ever go north of the
Well,
river?
I have gone north of the river once. It was a terrible experience, so I'll never do it again. No, truth be told, I do have some service departments north of the river, or I did have. I've handed some of them back during the whole Corona nonsense thing going on because of lockdown. People aren't allowed to come to the UK and have nice holidays here. So the need for service departments for tourists has somewhat plummeted.
Yeah.
So I've given a lot of my service accommodation units back, and I won't be taking on any more personally because I believe strongly in investing in an area that's close to you because you know it. You know the streets, you know the tenant type, you know the demand, you know how much things go. You just get a feel, don't you, locally, and you can't replicate that elsewhere. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me and say, "Oh, but I invest in Edinburgh or Liverpool or God knows where." But I know South London. I've been here for 20 years, and I've been an estate agent in London for a very, very, very long time. So I dare say that I know the area. So I'm sticking to South London because I know it and I'm comfortable with it. I know the demand. I know what prices are doing. I know people here, and that's why I firmly believe in investing locally.
No, that's a really good answer. I think many people actually there was somebody once funnily told me that there's a lot of people from like Birmingham investing in Liverpool and Manchester, but there's a lot of people from Liverpool and Manchester investing in Leeds. And there's a lot of people in Leeds who might be investing in kind of Hull or something, and everyone's kind of going out of their area to find a deal. But you know what? Actually, if they just dug a little bit deeper and saw what works in their own backyard, they could probably find opportunity, closer to home where, again, they have the local knowledge and local experience. Their quality of life is going to be so much better. And actually, there's quite a few people that I know that go far away. I mean, I myself, I do in West Midlands, I do in Kent. My rule is kind of no more than 2 hours from where I live because I've done stuff in the Northeast, which is where I'm originally from. And the traveling there and back is an absolute killer. So I'm a massive advocate for investing as close to home as possible. So I think you're on the money there. In terms
Makes sense.
of property investing, because I mean, rent to rent is where you're controlling the property. You're making money from not really acquiring the asset, but controlling it. In terms of property investing, is that something that's always on the radar alongside the rent-to-rent income generating portfolio?
Well, I think a lot of people will agree with me here that you need multiple streams of property income,
Yeah,
to use a coined phrase. So I own HMOs, I own single lets, I manage single lets for other people, I manage HMOs for other people, and I have rent to rent. So there's five different
right.
strategies that I'm employing, and that's what allows me to still make a reasonable amount of money despite the hiccups, despite the rent arrears, despite the empty rooms. I've got one balancing the other. So it's almost a left hand washes the right sort of thing. If you have a balanced portfolio, and not that my portfolio is the best balanced in the world, but I'm employing different strategies. So for example, the single rooms that are empty in a few rent-to-rent properties, that's not worrying me that much because on the whole, rent payments are quite good. And yeah, as a landlord, you're always thinking like, oh, well, they're going to pay the rent next month. But I firmly believe that the tenant type that I rent to in London, i.e. the young professional, they've got no reason not to pay the rent. They want a roof over their head, and I supply a nice gaff. So what's the big deal, right? Okay, you've lost your job. Let's go and get some universal credit or some support from the government. Great, we'll work through it. That's fine. My problem really is with the voids at the moment because I'm finding it difficult to predict demand. So go on.
I was going to say, so in terms, I mean, it could be, we've touched upon coronavirus, but in terms of being able to predict demand, there's a lot of debate all across social media, or, amongst all in WhatsApp groups, including yours. Um, what, how do you personally see this whole thing playing out? Do you think that there's going to be a V-shaped rebound and bounce back when everything comes back, or is it going to be a long U, or I mean, in general, I can probably assume what you'd hope for, but in terms of how do you think it will play out?
Well, it's tricky because I think the market as a whole is going to be quite tricky to predict. Let me tell you a bit more about the market sectors that I'm in. So, for example, the rent to rents, the lower end of things, your unskilled labor, your coffee baristas, your laborers, cleaners, that sort of segment of the market, they need 500, 600 quid a month rents, right? As I mentioned, a couple have gone back home to France, Spain, wherever. And, these are guys in their early 20s or girls, and they come over to London for, learn English and a bit of experience, right? And they get a little gig job, like, a coffee barista at a Nero's, for example, right? And my thinking is, well, if the economy is still slow, you're going to get less commuters anyway because of work from home policies and that sort of thing. And like this particular tenant was a coffee barista on the platform in Surbiton, and he was happily paying 500 quid for his room, and he was very happy. But hey, guess what? Nero cut him because there were no commuters going to central London anymore. Well, that's all good and well. When those commuters come back, they can look to rehire people like that, and then that draw for those young, early 20-year-olds coming back to London for a bit of learn English and a bit of adventure, that'll come back. But the question really is, Sam, when are we going to go back to work and normal as we know it, like commuting into the city? Because even after this pandemic thing is over, will companies in the city suddenly say, well, you know what, we may do working from home. Why don't we have a work from home policy? We can cut the expense of central London offices, and we can just pay for a nice desk and a nice ergonomic chair for our execs, and they can just work from home and have Skype meetings. That'd be great. So you're going to see a cut in the price of commercial real estate, I think, because there's going to be a lower demand for commercial offices in central London. Maybe co-working will go up, or maybe those will be converted to co-working, flexi, hot desk sort of things. I don't know. Maybe we'll see a bounce back of the whole WeWork thing. So, moving to the middle of the market, you're sort of, 2-bed flat, zone 2, and that's what I really know well, having been an estate agent in Clapham and Oval for years and years and years. The average rent of the flats I was letting in Clapham 5 years ago was like 1650. Again, I know people that run rent to rent or manage property in Clapham, Battersea, Wandsworth, those sorts of areas. And their tenant type is, 25 to 30. They work for PricewaterhouseCoopers or, name any other big firm. And suddenly they were furloughed or worked from home. And then they thought, well, hang on a minute, I'm on a month's notice here. I'm just going to give a month notice. I'm going to move back in with mum and dad in Hertfordshire. Mummy can do my cooking and my cleaning, and I'll save myself a bomb because, hey, guess what? Inferno's is shut anyway, and so is everything else on Clapham High Street. So why am I paying this extortionate rent to sit in a zone 2 flat when there's nothing here for me? So off they go to Hertfordshire. So that's really the middle of the market. Top end, crikey, top end rentals. What is happening there? Well, no idea. That's a segment I'm very unfamiliar with. So that's that. I can't gander that one, but I see a few voids in that middle of the market, and friends of mine have said like, oof, yeah, I've had to negotiate with a couple of tenants, give them 20% off here and there just to keep them, sort of thing. Because again, who wants to live in Clapham now? Unless all your friends are there and you can go out and all the rest. No, they're going home to mummy and daddy's in Hertfordshire. Honestly, why wouldn't you? Save a bit of money or buy a flat next year, when life is back to normal, whatever. So interesting time.
The unemployment is potentially going to rise. That means that people don't have as much money to spend on rent. But the furlough system has supported the whole market until until we know further about how long this thing will last. It seems like everything's kind of going well. The numbers are coming down, but it is true that this thing has been moving on a day-to-day basis. I think they were supposed to send the schools back, the primary schools back on Monday or something, and they've decided against that today, if I read that correctly this morning. But it literally is that fast moving from one day to the next. So just based on your answer, those are facts. But again, it's really hard to predict where it's going to go from here, because I don't know. It's just one of those things that we've not been through in our lifetime. So not on this global scale as well. And then you've got things like Brexit around the corner. When you try to factor in so many of these different variables, it just becomes
forget about Brexit, man. Brexit's on the back burner. This is the topic du jour. Forget Brexit. I'm not even worried about that.
Exactly. What is even so? In terms of property people, we're here to kind of discuss ideas, experiences, problems, and solutions. I feel like we've definitely done that here today. But in terms of one of the biggest problems that you see facing the property market as a whole going forward, is there anything that comes to mind immediately, and perhaps a solution for that?
The problem with property letting is that it's gotten too complicated. And I think what the government wants is obviously to bring, and this comes back to a conversation previously about the regulations and licensing. Yeah. Regulation's good, licensing is good. I promote safety, and, everyone should have a gas safety and electrical and all that doodah. But I just think the punishments are a little bit disproportionate to the risk. If you can demonstrate to a judge, look, I've got an electric cert and a gas safety and all this doodah, oh, whoops, I forgot to apply for a license or whatever, then you shouldn't have to repay all the rent. I think that's a bit over the top. I think that there's a lot of people out there that are selling up that really, I think the government's shooting themselves in the foot. I think maybe one of them read a magazine and they saw some massive co-living development like the one in North Acton that Reza Merchant did a while ago, and they thought, this is the future, this is what we want, this is, it's safe, secure, all the rest of it. Get rid of all these Victorian crummy flats in London that were just kept as a spare buy-to-let pension income by Harry and Sally that have now moved to Surrey or whatever. Get rid of all that, institutionalize it all, and do build to rent on mass scale to solve this this housing crisis, because rents are too high. We can offer rents for lower money. If you do the whole build to rent thing, then I suppose you could bring the unit cost down. But ultimately, I don't think they've gone about it the right way. It's a bit political. They're trying to get votes from generation rents. I think the actions that they've taken with the taxation regulation are just a little bit overboard. And I don't think that, if you look at the numbers of how many illegal landlords there are, or rogue landlord fines, if that's what you want to call it, versus, actual, it's so disproportionate. So they're legislating out stuff that doesn't need to be legislated out. The rental sector is fine.
What about, final question, rent controls? Is that a solution or a problem?
It's the nail in the coffin. If you want to artificially halt the market, then that's a real problem. You can't cap rent. You can't say, right, we're going to take this much of your gross rental income, because landlords go, well, we'll just increase gross then, right? Like we said earlier. But if you then say, no, you can't do that, then you're going to get landlords exiting en masse, because I think it comes back to looking at your returns, right? And a good friend of ours, Rod Turner, he always says, does this deal return more tax-free than your ISA? If you stick this money in ISA, will return the same pound for pound. And you're getting dangerously close to just sticking your money in the bank, man, when you put in rent controls and all taxation. And you got to leave something on the table for the entrepreneur, because essentially everyone that's running a property type business, they're an entrepreneur of some sort, right? They take risk, they should receive that reward. If you cap that reward, that's the quickest way to get rid of people out of that market. Just like when you have a salesperson and you say, well, your commission's capped, you can only do so much. And, there's people out there that want to be bigger and better than me, for example, and they want a million properties. But if you say, well, you can only make this much, then it's fine.
It's a one-way ticket, really. If you suffocate people's ambitions and the free market, you'll basically take away their incentive to do better and add value. So on that note, I think I could talk to you all day, Jeroen. Thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely brilliant. Let's do this again sometime, maybe in 12 months' time. So we'll see how this coronavirus thing's taken the property market by storm and see where we've ended up and go from there.
Absolutely. Sounds like a good idea, Sam. I'd love to do a follow-up interview. Let's see where we go. And, well, at the moment, I've got rooms to fill. So I'll catch you next time.
Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got lots more super active property people coming up. So keep up to date. Click the subscribe button. Hit the bell icon. Leave us a comment. Share us and find us across social media. And we'll see you next time.